All right, guys, welcome to another video. Today, we're going to talk about calves, specifically in regards to the next upcoming calf cycle, which as of this point is probably about 4 months away. We're in mid-February, right? That's a guess. We'll see when we get a little bit closer. But we're going to cover today factors that determine who gets left out. Right, so on the screen you saw earlier, there was Nevsky, there was Joan, there's William, there's Hull. We'll compare them to each other, talk about their strengths and weaknesses, whether they play duplicating roles. Specifically, we're going to compare Nevsky and Hull just because they play the exact same role and they're very similar. And then what I think you should do. So let's actually start out with who gets left out. Well, it really depends. And anyone that claims to know, I will roll my eyes just because there's so many factors that we don't know, right? Is this going to be a primary or secondary commander? Hull has to be primary. Nevsky gets a lot of his values from being primary. So one, his defense debuff, you want that to hit first so the secondary commander can benefit off of it. Ideally, the secondary commander is doing more damage just because Nevsky's skill damage boost, 35% of it actually only goes to the secondary commander, right? So ideally, it's an AoE because when you do AoE, you're hitting multiple targets. That's going to be more than the 2,300 that he's bringing. We don't even talk about whether the MGE calf commander is going to be viable, right? So when a commander gets released, usually there was one that comes in the wheel, that one comes in the MGE. The MGE one is usually going to be also like a rally or a garrison. That's been the trend, right? But Ashurbanipal is actually very field viable. And if you gave me the choice straight up between Ashurbanipal and Boudica, I would take Ashurbanipal. So if the MGE calf commander is field viable, or let's just say it's actually was released to be a pair with the wheel commander, right? Attila and Takeda came out. Maybe two of those commanders could get left out if you're running 2 marches. And then if you're running 1 calf march, maybe all 4 of those won't be part of the meta. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but that's actually also a possibility, right? Another one is whether the buffs or debuffs overlap. I talked about Nevsky's defense debuff. If the new commander also has a defense reduction debuff and it's better than Nevsky's, all of a sudden Nevsky's a lot less viable. Even though right now, in my opinion, Nevsky's better than Huo, right? But if you take away his defense debuff, all of a sudden Huo might be who you actually run. How many marches are you running, right? If you're running 3 marches, and usually that's going to be 1 infantry, 1 archer, 1 cav, that's going to change your strategy versus, let's just say you're running 4 or 5. Now you have the option of flexing up to 2 calves, then that also changes the strategy. Finally, there could be some synergy with existing or even older commanders that we haven't thought about, right? If a smite commander, a smite calf commander comes out, and you never know, we just got range smite damage, but if a smite calf commander comes out, does Attila come back into the meta, right? You could see Lu Che literally brought Alex back from the dead. If the new commander does something where he adds a buff when he gets healing, all of a sudden Huo will become a lot more valuable, right? So there's so many different things that could come out that shakes up the current meta that we could speculate on, but until it's actually released, we just don't know. And I also talked about tankiness, just because you need a certain amount of tankiness on the field. If someone is just like a glass cannon, it's really, really hard to use them now, just with all the damage that's on the field. So let's actually compare the commanders. First, I want you to look at the very top, right? So I have kind of their role underneath their names. So Nevsky and Hull, to me, play a very similar role. One, ideally, they're primary, but 2, they're what I call amplifiers, right? They do skill damage boost, massive skill damage boost, and anti-flying, I think it's like when it has a multiplicative effect, right? So if you do 1,000 damage points worth of skill damage, and then you get a 60% skill damage boost, now you're doing 1,600. Now, the higher the damage factor is already, the more you benefit from that skill damage boost. If you're doing like 10 skill damage, like literally 10 skill damage points, even if you boost that by 60%, you go to 16, like who cares, right? So Nevsky and Huo, even though their single target damage is really high, they're actually limited by their damage factor, because when you factor in that, say for example, William could hit 3 targets, even though the 1500 seems low. If you hit 3 targets, right, and there is a 30% reduction per target, because every additional target you hit, you lose 15%. It still comes up to 1,050 times 3, which actually is 3,150, right? So if I told you, would you rather do 3,150 worth of damage factor on 3 targets, or 2,300 on a single target for Nevsky, that actually changes how I think a lot of people will view this. So a lot of times we just think, oh, 1,500 is low. You have to factor in how many targets it's hitting, and there's some utility there too. Right now, someone like Joan brings a lot of damage factor, right? Because on every other turn, she's going to proc her expertise. So instead of 4,200 max hitting 3 targets, you're actually getting 8,400. But the amplifier, so Huo and Nevsky, will actually take that skill damage and make it even more effective, which is why there's no perfect commander besides Liu Chen. I'm just kidding. There's no perfect commander. Ideally, when you're pairing these commanders, they all bring some kind of strength and weakness to the table, and then synergy is when the commanders shore up each other's weaknesses, right? If you take someone like ZL and YSG, massive damage, 5 targets, massive skill damage boost. ZL has a great debuff, right? 5 targets dealing like 50% less damage, but neither of them bring march speed, and that makes that march good in certain situations, but for the most part, not as usable, or not that good, because there's just no march speed on that march. So being synergistic is really important. So Joan, I already mentioned, brings a damage factor. Now, William is, in my opinion, probably the most underrated commander in the game. I even made a video a few weeks ago talking about why I think Mina and William is the most underrated march. One of the reasons, just because it actually performed really well for me, but 2, that's actually a march that you can field without spending any gold heads, right? You could buy William in the dailies, and then Mina you could actually get like the first day of the game if you want. And when you pair them together with Mina's double museum relic, that march is actually very, very viable and good. And it's a march I enjoy using a lot. And I know Mina's okay, right? With his double museum is okay. In my opinion, I think William is actually really carrying that march. And a lot of times whenever we see like the Hull reports, right, they're like, oh, look how great Hull's doing. Well, yeah, he has William or Joan behind him, right? Like, it's almost like Hull's getting all the credit, and we're forgetting that William or Joan is actually bringing a lot of utility. So let's actually talk about William a little bit more. If you look at William's skill and compare that with Trajan side by side, I probably would actually take the utility that William brings straight up over Trajan. So you literally have a commander, one that's cav, so now you don't have that march speed problem, that utility wise is on par with. Let's just say you think Trajan's better. It's only a little bit, right? Or maybe even worse than William. And then this cav march, William, also still does 1,500 skill damage up to 3 targets. And he's actually bringing an instant proc, which almost no one talks about. And it's just mind-blowing to me why William is not getting more love. Instant proc to me, so the way I like to think about a 10% instant proc is if it's in 10 turns and you have a 10% chance of proccing that, about 65% of the time, you're going to launch at least one instant proc with a 10% activation chance in 10 turns. Now, the way skill cycles work, right, you build up rage, you get it. On the very first time, before you launch the first active skill, if the rage requirement's 1,000 and you have a horn, on average, it comes out to about, on the 9th turn, you're going to launch your first active skill. Now, once you launch your active skill, it could trigger you rejuvenate, all these other rage boosts. The next turn you launch it, it'll usually be like 2 turns faster. So if the first turn is turn 9, the next time you launch active skill, it'll be another 7 turns on average, right? So there's some RNG there. If you lower the rage cost, so for example, with Huo, you bring that down to 850 instead of 1,000. Theoretically, you can actually launch your active skill every 5 turns, because it takes 4 turns to actually hit the rage requirement, because the rage cap is 220, right? So 220 times 4 is 880, right? So you're actually crossing over that 850 threshold, and then on the next turn you launch it. Theoretically, you can launch it on turn 5. More likely, it's going to be turn 6, and then if you're 1,000 rage requirement, most likely it's going to be turn 7. 10% chance to proc an active skill in 6 turns. It comes out to about like 46-47% of the time you're going to launch that active skill at least once in 6 turns. If you're doing it every 7 turns, it comes out to a little over 50%. I think it's like 52%. So just about half the time you're going to proc that active skill in turn 6 or turn 7. Right now, to launch an active skill, you actually have to either stay connected to the target or cycle your rage onto another target to launch it. Whereas for an instant proc, you don't have that problem. You could poke forward and back, forward and back. You could drop out of combat. Every single time you touch the target, there is a chance that you're going to launch an active skill. If you gave me the option, 10% to launch active skill, to launch an instant proc versus a active skill that does the same damage factor, I will take the instant proc any day of the week, right? And William actually brings that. So it's not so clear that William is actually going to be dropped out of the picture. It really depends on who comes out, and that's kind of the purpose of this slide. Now we're going to take away William and Joan and compare Huo and Nevsky, but if you compare Joan and William, right, because they both bring AoE, William brings a lot of utility. Joan brings some utility too. If you look at the bottom left over here, when she launches her active skill, 3 allies actually still get 5% all damage, and they get 20 rage per second, which is not like nothing. It's actually pretty good for 3 seconds. I think Joan will eke out on top a little bit just because that damage factor, especially with the expertise, is just so much higher, right? And the current meta is just a lot of skill damage in a short amount of time. AoE, you need that. And Joan will probably be eked out over William, but they actually play different roles, because William brings the utility that Joan can't match, and Joan brings the damage factor that William can't match. But Nevsky and Huo actually kind of overlap. So you could compare those two, and I would probably take Joan over William slightly, but it's not so cut and dry as people think, where Joan's just so much better than William. Okay, so when the new Cav Commander comes out, depending on the role that Cav Commander plays, you can pair him up with someone that shores up his or her weakness to make a good march. It's just not so clear. But let's actually compare Huo and Nevsky. Okay, so there's a lot more numbers on the screen. Right, on the right, you already seen that. It's just now side by side. On the left, it's just showing you like a max damage factor output with Joan without factoring in like the attack, defense, all that stuff, right? So Nevsky, 2300 times 1.25, because for the primary commander, he's only benefiting the primary commander with a 25% CO damage boost. But then for the secondary commander, he does an extra 35%. Anyways, it comes out to 16,315. Okay, if you trigger Huo's third skill, which only lasts for 15 seconds, right? So both the primary and secondary commander is getting a 55% skill damage boost. The damage factor comes out to 17,205. It's a little bit better, right? It's like, I don't know the percentage, it's like 7%, something like that. Don't quote me on that, I'm just making that up. A little bit better than Nevsky. But if you do Huo with no boost, that number drops significantly down to 13,875, because now you're only getting a 25% skill damage boost, right? And really what I want this to highlight is that Huo's value actually comes from him staying in that state where the third skill is reducing the rage requirement by 150, so it's an 850 rage requirement. And also you either drop out of combat and go back into combat, or actually when you're getting healing, right, that 3000 healing factor from his expertise, it triggers it all over again. It's actually kind of crazy to me that there is a debate whether you should press the expertise button on Huo, because in my opinion, his value comes from actually triggering that healing. And I'll talk about why. So I made a video a few weeks ago. Maybe I should be linking this, but if you just look, I've only made like 20 something videos on how sevs work. how severely wounded work. Okay, there's two factors that really amplify sev wounds that you deal. One is the differential between the troop count. So if you have a really high troop count, let's just say in this case 200,000, 400,000, and then you're hitting someone with like 2,000, like big difference in the troop count raises both of your severely wounded ratio. So whenever you deal damage, a part of that goes into sev wounds, a part of that goes into slightly wounded, right? That sev wound percentage will get higher as the difference in the troop count gets bigger and bigger. The second one is when the lower your troop count, so the closer you get to 0, right? So when you're down to like 10,000, 5,000, right before you die, and usually, if you bring out a full march, your health bar is going to be in red. That sev wound rate also goes up significantly. Now, Huo is mid-tanky, right? He brings 35% of defense, but he's not like Nevsky tanky, not even close. Nevsky, in my opinion, is by far the most tanky meta march. Like, he just brings a lot of stats. He has procs that actually reduce more damage when he's surrounded, right? He takes 5% less damage. He has a 10% to proc, a 30% health bonus, which is actually huge for 3 seconds. And Huo is mid-tanky, but because of his healing, he actually also can stay on the field with a lot of health for a long time. Now, if you just think about how his expertise works, right? He gets that healing when he kills someone. And you're only going to be stacking these kills, right? Because it only lasts 15 seconds. You're only going to be stacking these kills when you're killing one target, then another target, then another target. And essentially, your side has to be winning on the field. If your side is not winning on the field, you're not going to be killing a lot of targets. You're not going to be getting that healing, and you're not going to get these crazy looking reports. But if you are keeping the healing up, you're able to keep your march really, really high, because when your troop count is really high, even if you take damage, the sev wound rate is very low. So the slightly wounded, you can actually keep healing that up. You can put out some of the most beautiful reports out there, right? So for all the people that are sharing the reports on Huo, I don't think, like off the top of my head, there's not another commander that is more conducive to putting out beautiful reports, just because no other meta commander has healing like Huo. 3,000 damage factor is a lot, and we could keep healing 3,000 over and over and over again while you're fighting. Your reports are going to look really good because your health is, your troop count is super high, so you're dealing a lot of sev wounds, and you have a lot of staying power. But if Huo gets targeted, or if your ball isn't winning against another ball where you're not getting a lot of kills, he's going to drop out of that his third skill. I keep forgetting the name of that, where he actually becomes kind of mid, right? So Huo is one of those like commanders, if you equate him to like a NBA player, right? He's very flashy. He's going to have really good looking stat lines, especially when they're winning. But when you're not winning, he doesn't actually bring a lot of utility, right? The 45% defense reduction, this stat box here is actually from T5 infantry with max crystal tech, and then it was just like what the stats were with my gear on it. If you just plug in a 45% defense reduction there, that's going to come out to about a 23% extra damage taken, right? And that's everyone who's hitting that march is going to be dealing 23% extra damage. Huo's only utility is a single target 50% reduction in march speed. And that's good because whoever you hit, if they move 50% slower, or not 50% slower, they lose 50% march speed, they're going to be able to retreat a lot slower. They're probably going to get melted down, right? But it's not as beneficial to everyone else, because it like the 45% defense reduction, right, like he's going to be taking that damage no matter what. The 50% march speed, the guy has to actually be out of position for you to benefit from it. And also it's not so cut and dry that he's always going to be staying in that state where his third skill is active. A lot of times you're not. When you drop out of that, he's going to be very mid. Whereas like if you look at Nevsky, he's just very, very tanky. So even though he doesn't have the healing, he has a lot more staying power. So even when your ball isn't winning, he's able to actually provide a lot more. and that skill damage boost is going to be there no matter what. Whether like it's not some like proc where like the secondary commander is always going to be dealing 60% skill damage if she or he launches his active skill. So if you compare the two to me, I would take Nevsky over Hull. Doesn't mean Hull's bad. Hull's actually really good, and he's fun to use. But even when he was released, this was my feeling on it, and I actually personally decided to skip him. Not because I think he's bad, just that I think unless the new Cav commander comes out and there's some kind of thing that scales with healing, Hull is actually probably going to be the most at risk, just because William brings utility, massive utility. Joan brings that damage factor because of the double AoE, and the Hull and Nevsky seem kind of duplicative, right? They are very similar, but Nevsky is just a lot more consistent. Hull requires you to be winning. Nevsky is just good all around. And if you gave me the choice, I would actually pick Nevsky. And just for shits and giggles, if you take this stat here, right? I know this is for like my infantry stats, but when at the end game, the stat, at least it's in the same range, right? If you add a 20% boost here to the attack, so like for example, if Nevsky brings 20% attack, I make this 180 versus Hull, which I make this 200% boost. The 20% extra attack comes out to about a 7% difference in extra damage dealt, right? But if you look at Nevsky's defense reduction in the bullet point above, every time someone gets a 45% defense reduction, they actually take 23% extra damage. I think it's just pretty conclusive that Nevsky is better than Hull. Hull is good, and it's not like it's like a massive gap, but Hull is very streaky. He needs you to be winning, and when you are winning and you're getting kills, Hull's probably a little bit better than Nevsky, but in general, Nevsky is way more consistent, and I would actually take Nevsky over Hull because Nevsky will probably be better than Hull most of the time. And Hull only has like a small window where he needs the conditions to be right to actually be better than Nevsky. So that's kind of the conclusion that I came to. So what should you do? Again, it actually really depends. Kind of a cop-out answer, right? Because there's how many marches you're running, what's your spend level, or essentially your gold head accumulation rate, right? So if you're maxing the wheel, that comes out to, I want to say like about 90 gold heads or commander sculptures per wheel. For me, my gold head accumulation rate, if I'm maxing out the wheel, is somewhere between like 350 to 400 gold heads a month. Right? So to max commander, like 690 or 700, depending on whether you're counting the unlock, usually that's like about a month and a half to 2 months to max a commander. Also the time from Cav release. So like right now you're 4.5 months out. You could probably do a lot more. If you already got everything else done, maybe just go for Joan. Whereas like if you're 2 months out, you might want to be a little bit more careful. And then also there's just preference. Okay, so for example, me personally, not this game so much, but when I'm playing other games, I like melee, right? Even if the range is better, I have a lot more fun, quote unquote, sitting on someone's face, getting right up in their face and meleeing. So I always pick the warrior in other games, and I just have more fun with it, and that's actually a factor. So here's the strategy. Invest in infantry first. Luce is the best commander, in my opinion, in the game. Scipio Luce is the best march, but even if you break that march into 2 infantry marches, Guan, Scipio, and then Luce and Alex, who's really easy to get because you get them through dailies, you get them early, like in KVK 2, are both tier 1 marches, on par with Nevsky and Joan, in my opinion. It's kind of blasphemous to say because for a while, Nevsky and Joan was recognized as the best march, but on the field, not dueling, on the field, Guan, Skippy, and Luce Alex are both tier 1 marches in my opinion right now. Now, if you are going to go with one Cav march, I would still recommend going with Nevsky Joan. I still think it's the best march, but it's so close. And that's why like Cavs are so interesting, because if you plan on running 2 or maybe even 3 Cav marches, then right now invest in all 4, right? Because they're all so good. Like even Hull William is a tier 1 march. He's good, and even if someone else comes out, you have to run 3 Cav marches. That 3rd Cav march is still going to be on par with the 2nd infantry march and the 2nd archer march. So you really can't go wrong. But if you had to pick one right now, I would go with Nevsky Joan. And If you ever see like when there's like a coaching search in sports or anything, there's like betting odds. Oh, is it gonna be Bill Belichick? Is it gonna be whatever? Right? And there's like a like an odds maker. If I had to pick one march for if I had to pick one march that's gonna be paired with the new calf commander to be the new meta, I would actually guess Joan, just because one, she brings utility, right? Not as much as William, but she still brings utility. But also, she does something unique that no other calf commander does right now, is she brings the damage factor with that utility, right? So like if you look at Huo and Nevsky, I already talked about it. They should be primary commanders, they're amplifiers, but they don't necessarily actually bring that AoE damage factor. And then William has some damage factor, 3 target, but it's just a little bit lower and doesn't proc it twice. Right, so like if I had to pick one, I think the safest is going to be Joan, and then the second would probably be Nevsky, just because he's just so good overall. If he had AoE, he'd be like perfect, right? Then probably William, and then probably the first one on the chopping block, in my opinion, would actually be Huo. But again, there's so many different factors. Something comes out that skills or healing, boom, Huo goes to the top, right? Now, I personally skip Huo, not because I think he's bad. I didn't think Sargon was that good. Huo's actually good. The reason why I skipped him was just because I was so far behind in commanders. Like, I'm still not fully caught up. I probably still need another month and a half, right? And I figured that by the time I actually got caught up, just looking at the commanders, I might not even be using Huo anymore. So I skipped him. Right now, if you were going to skip one out of the 4, I would probably recommend skipping Huo as well. Just because William, if you're any kind of a spender, you could get William in the dailies, and he's really, really good. He's really good. If you compare Huo and Nevsky, I would take Nevsky over Huo. So if you are going to go for 3 out of the 4, right now I would skip Huo. Even though he would put out the best looking reports, just because when the conditions are right, his reports look amazing, right? Because he could keep healing, keep his health high, keep his troop count high. But in general, as far as utility, besides just bringing out massive damage, he actually doesn't provide as much utility as the other 3. Okay. If you watch all the way to the end of this rambling, hopefully you got some value from it. If you did, please like and subscribe to the video. Please leave your comments. I read all of them, and I respond to a lot of them. If you guys ever left a comment, I read and respond to it. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a good day.